Today is Tuesday, February 25th, 2025. This is Lou Storey, representing the City of Savannah's Municipal Archives as a volunteer for the Learning Center, Senior Citizens, Inc. I'm interviewing Bruce Cohen for the Everyone Has a Story project through the Savannah Community Memory Project. We're conducting this interview at my home. Thank you for joining us today. Let's give me your name and spell it.
Hi, I'm Bruce Cohen, Brucecohen, and I live here in Savannah now.
So, what would you like to tell the archive?
I'd like to talk about how I got to Savannah and why it's so important for me to be here now in this stage of my life. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and our family was not very close. And as I became an adult, I realized how important connection and community had become for me. I started reaching out to create a family of choice with friends as a young adult, and I started to get more involved in the communities where I lived. I lived in the Boston area for a long time, and then I lived in Washington, D.C., and then for the last 7 or 8 years, I've been here in Savannah. And I decided if my family didn't provide that sense of connection and belonging, there were other wonderful opportunities for me to feel embraced by the people I cared for and to give back to where I was. So the sense of place always became very important to me. When my wife and I retired in 2016, we began our journey to look for where we felt comfortable. We've been living in the Northeast, and I definitely wanted to get out of the cold for part of the year at least. We checked out a variety of places, and then we found Savannah. And I immediately felt connected here, how this place nourishes me physically and emotionally. Physically, the beauty and the surroundings, the low country and the trees provided me a sense of peace and well-being. And it was really still important for me to connect to the community and to give back in this stage of my life. And Savannah has provided enormous opportunity. I've found the people here to be incredibly welcoming, people who've lived here for a long time, and relatively newcomers like myself. I've met an enormous number of people, and I have been able to connect to a variety of organizations here that feed my intellect and my emotions and my soul.
That's great. What are some of those organizations?
Well, I'm Jewish, and I've always been connected to my heritage. I grew up in an Orthodox household, but I was never a congregational Jew. I found the temple, Mikveh Israel, has given me an opportunity to explore not only my Jewish roots, but I've become fascinated with the history of Jews here in Savannah. So I'm getting involved in projects that delve into the rich heritage of Southern Jews, which is very different than my upbringing, and the importance and how that community evolved. The Savannah Jewish community is one of the oldest in the country. In fact, the greatest migration of Jews to colonial America took place here in Savannah in 1733. Not only that, but the Jews who arrived here were treated as equals, something unique in American history. So that has helped me connect to that group, but my interests are more far-reaching. We've connected to the Senior Citizens Center for Learning, which has been a wonderful way to meet people and not only learn, but allowed us opportunities to teach and to give back to communities as well. The first thing we did when we got to Savannah, my wife was looking through the newspapers and she found a group called Drinking Liberally. We are very progressive on the political spectrum, and we were concerned that we wouldn't find like-minded people here. Drinking Liberally is an organization that exists throughout the country. I think there are between 25 and 30 different chapters in areas that are more conservative. It's a way of people who are progressive and liberal to get together and feel comfortable about just socializing and sharing themselves. We met people who become our lifelong friends now through Drinking Liberally. A couple other groups I've been involved with. It's now called the Center for Jubilee. It's the Susie King Taylor group that's done a remarkable job in helping rename Calhoun Square to Taylor Square, and looking forward to integrating an understanding of the richness of the African American community here in Savannah. And one other group that we're beginning to get involved with is ASALA. ASALA is the Association for African American for the study of African American life and history. The idea is to educate and transmit the enormous history and heritage of the Black community here. There's so many things about Savannah that attract me. The richness of the history. We're about a mile away from the bloodiest hour in the American Revolution. Growing up in the Northeast, I had no idea how significant Savannah was in the American Revolution. I had no idea that in 2 squares up from where I live was a seminal event that could have changed American history. Field Order 15 would have revolutionized the relationship of blacks and whites in this country after the Civil War. So walking the squares and connecting with people gives me enormous pleasure, not only an opportunity to learn, which I think is really important for me at this age, but an opportunity to share with people what I'm learning.
You mentioned organizations. You mentioned the Senior Center. What is your involvement there?
My wife primarily teaches a course on film that I assist her with, and she came up with a wonderful idea to essentially look at feature films and documentaries around the same topics. She's combs the literature and finds wonderful films, and then we watch these films and discuss them. We've dealt with social justice issues, we've dealt with issues of family and connection, and this year the theme is Pathways Towards Healing. It's been a wonderful experience, and the richness has really been connecting with everyone in the class to share their experiences and to learn from each other and to support each other in a really safe environment. I've also done a talk there, and I'm planning to do another talk. My profession has been as an epidemiologist, and after COVID, people finally knew what that really meant, and I'm going to be giving a talk later this year about recent successes in public health and the challenges that we're facing now.
You tell me more about that, about being an epidemiologist.
I'm not an infectious disease epidemiologist. I've always thought that epidemiology more is an art than a science. It's a way of viewing the world. And my approach and my interest was, I'm a data geek, providing information to communities to help them make better decisions when they plan for themselves. I worked in the federal government for the National Center for Health Statistics. I was involved in a series of publications called Statistical Notes for Health Planners to help guide cities and counties. I was involved in national programs to develop approaches to health status indicators that might be more meaningful. And then I felt like I moved up the food chain. After I worked for the feds for about 10 years, I worked for the state of Massachusetts in the health department. And there I was able to take my interest and my focus directly into communities and provide them with support, investigating issues of infant mortality and race and ethnic variation. I developed an alternative approach for collecting data around race and ethnicity so that the respondents felt not put upon but engaged in helping describe the richness of their heritage. And I had some success in that. I guess the pinnacle of my epidemiologic career was after I retired, we moved to a small town north of Boston, and I got involved in the local health department, and I became chair of the local board of health. And when COVID hit, I had enormous emergency authority to help try to keep our community safe. And it was a challenge in a small town because of competing and conflicting interests. The only thing I've ever been conservative about in my life is my desire to protect people from COVID. So I was adamant about masking and distancing and working with the school board to make sure that our schools were safe for our kids.
That's great. Tell me more about your experience during that pandemic, because it was quite an extraordinary time and you were in a very unique position.
I felt I was. I wasn't totally prepared for it. I'm not an expert in infectious disease. There was a steep learning curve, but in Massachusetts, counties aren't really viable levels of government intervention. There are 351 towns, and each town and community was sort of independent, although the state health department tried to provide support. I think I was one of the very few epidemiologists and data-driven folks who was able to use my experience and my connection to the state health department to find out detailed data about the neighborhoods and the status on a real-time basis of COVID, of vaccination, of risk in our community. It was very trying because there were so many competing interests. Folks wanting their kids to go back to school when neighboring school districts had their kids back in school, but me not being comfortable that we wouldn't understand how COVID spread in schools, requiring distancing and masking when other communities had less mandatory requirements. So it was challenging. It's funny because little local boards of health weren't politically very prominent until COVID. At our meetings, we would have one or two people attend our in-person meetings. When we went to Zoom meetings, we had 50 to 100 people Zooming in, expressing their opinions and their frustrations. It really changed the dynamic of local public health, some for the better and some creating more problems. So it was very challenging for me to try to provide what I thought was evidence-based guidance when there were so many other competing interests.
Mm-hmm. Going forward, what do you imagine? It seems there's a lot of change culturally since the pandemic in different ways. from your perspective, what's your sense of that?
It's a really complex question. I think how people work has been transformed in a way that will never go back to pre-COVID status. I think how people communicate, I never Zoomed with my friends across the country. I have interest groups now where I can keep better in touch. I think it's affected people's travel. And I think it's affected people's psychological view of the world. I'm not sure whether it's my aging or time. I feel more disconnected and more isolated in many ways. And I think the politics of the time is making me focus more on interpersonal relationships and building community and focusing on change at the local level rather than thinking more broadly. I grew up in the generation of the 60s where we felt that we could make a huge difference in society, and we felt we were. But the political events of the last 10 years really has made me feel I was incredibly naive and short-sighted about our country and how other people think as opposed to my set of beliefs.
Is there anything you would do differently now that you are not naive?
I valued that naivety, and I believe in the goodness of people. Although it's difficult for me to see that now in some of the national and regional political events. People don't seem to really be committed to the notion of helping those less fortunate. I don't know what I could have done to help create a better foundation where everyone believed that there's enough resources and goodness in this country to provide for those less fortunate. The biggest, I don't know whether it's a mistake, the biggest thing I think my generation could have done was really work harder to instill those values of the importance of social justice, equality, and acceptance of people for who they are, rather than needing to change them.
The organizations that you're involved with now, the projects, how do they relate to that mission?
I think they're places where I feel comfortable, where people share my beliefs and are moving in the same direction, where there's a real present commitment and a past experience of trying to respect each other and treat each other with grace, and trying to make marginal changes to make our neighborhoods, our streets, our interpersonal reactions, and our community of Savannah a more welcoming place, a place where everyone feels accepted and treated equally. So it's great to have, when I talked about the sense of place, I really feel enveloped by Savannah and comforted by the people here, and it's given me, I think, wonderful opportunities to share and try to give back. This stage of my life, it's really important to embrace the sense of giving back.
You mentioned stage of life a few times. How would you define this stage of life?
I'm 74 years old. The end is closer than the beginning. And it's funny, retirement for both me and my wife sort of kick-started, provided us with a new energy and challenge to embrace doing things differently. We moved to two places where we knew very few people, and it gave us energy to reach out in a way I never expected. Being old and not worrying about how people view you gives you a freedom, and it opens you up to be able to do things you really wanted to do, but maybe felt constrained in doing when you had to please your boss at work, or adhere to social norms of others. I feel more comfortable expressing who I am and actually focusing more on my inward journey as well, to think more about who I am and how I want to internalize my feelings and present them to the people I care about.
You mentioned the Susie King Taylor Jubilee, what's it called?
It's become called, now the name is the Center for Jubilee. It was originally the Susie King Taylor Coalition, and the two remarkable women leaders, Pat Gunn and Roz Roos, had this idea that they could put together a group to make change here in Savannah. And they grew this coalition. I came to it late, but I really felt, so welcomed and embraced to become an ally in their work. Savannah has got such a rich history, and the squares are so important to the sense of community here. There was no square that honored any African Americans. There was no square that honored any women. And it was Pat and Roz, with the help of a variety of folks, who came up with the idea of naming a square to honor Susie King Taylor, an African American nurse during the Civil War and an educator. And they worked diligently to create a group to forward this idea. There were many challenges. The city developed a process that allow consideration of options for names, and successfully a square that was named after John Calhoun, a virulent racist with no connection to Savannah, to be renamed to honor this wonderful woman who spent a great part of her life here.
And when did that happen?
The square was officially renamed, I think, 2 years ago. The process took over 3 years to build a coalition, to build momentum, to address a variety of political and technical issues. But it created an incredible model that was lauded not only locally but nationally, of how a group of concerned residents and citizens can implement change, and is a wonderful example, I think, of how Savannah works, and why I just enjoy and love being here so much.
Sure. Are there other things in the works that you know of, or things where you think change could be helpful?
Wow. That's a multi-level question. There's change for me and where I see my life going, and there's change for our community. Savannah is a delicate balancing act. It's wonderful that this city has attracted so many visitors, but balancing the quality of life for the people who've lived here and not displacing people, and focusing on the quality of life of all of our neighborhoods, not just the visitors, is difficult. Housing prices are going up, people are being displaced. SCAD is a huge influence. I think it's done wonders for the community, and at the same time, their town and gown issues. SCAD doesn't, I think, contribute as much in terms of monetary support to the community as it should be. And there are issues I feel moving forward that need to create a delicate balance here. So I don't know how those issues will ultimately play out.
And for the uninitiated, well, what is SCAD?
Savannah College for Art and Design, a pivotal, wonderful place that really helped re-energize and revitalize Savannah. And the restoration movement in bringing more art and a wonderful sense of life to particularly the downtown area. They've been incredible. Bringing in youth and a sense of exuberance has been great. And it's created challenges. So those need to be addressed.
Yeah. So assumedly, in some future time, let's say 100 years from now, someone accesses this interview, is there anything you'd want that person to know about you or about this time, or really anything that might be important?
I guess I have a multi-level message. Personally, for people at my age, there's so many opportunities and so many things to look forward, and being engaged provides enormous personal satisfaction. I hope people who see this, who are my age cohort, can help be energized by just one example of a person who feels there's a lot of life left. Savannah, one of the reasons we moved here was the sense of diversity and sense of commitment. I hope Savannah figures out a way to balance all the competing interests to improve the quality of life for everyone here. And in 100 years, I hope this is an incredibly integrated, socioeconomically, racially, ethnically, visitors, residents place that just flourishes and creates a sense of happiness and joy in everyone who's here.
Mm-hmm. And are there things right now that you think are pushing toward that, and or against?
Well, I guess the context in which we operate, the political context of this region and of the United States right now, makes it more difficult to promote the values that I see that are fundamental and foundational for creating progress. Mm-hmm. It's a huge challenge how we personally and collectively address this significant change in the context of our life here. Totally unexpected and incredibly saddening and frustrating and disappointing for me. I'm sorry, what was?
Just really asking about what's helping bring about this better future you'd like to see, and what's getting in the way of it.
Well, that's certainly, I think, a huge impediment. So that needs to change fundamentally for us to move forward. Mm-hmm. And I think this change is going to be slow. I'm not particularly optimistic that we're moving forward right now. I think we're backsliding some, quite frankly. And I think we need to focus on re-energizing and building from the bottom up rather than from the top down, and working in neighborhoods and communities and doing things to push the voices of progressive social change and equality forward, because the challenges exist now and are being created as we speak. That makes that more difficult.
Okay. Any final thoughts or anything you'd like to share? And then we can conclude the oral history.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share. It's having the chance to reflect about my life and where I am and where I see myself and my community around me is a gift you've given me. So I really appreciate it.
All right, well, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.